The boy went down without a sound, and that was the part that froze my blood. People who faint dramatically, who cry out or sway or reach for something, those you can catch. This one just folded. One moment he was a small shape pressed against the gilded railings, his fingers hooked through the iron the way every child hooks them there, watching the still red figure beyond the bars. The next moment the coat, that enormous gray coat, 3 sizes too big, the kind that comes off a charity shop rail with somebody else's name still ironed faintly into the collar, crumpled down onto the hot cobblestones, and the boy was inside it, and the boy was not moving. I have sold roasted chestnuts and bottled water from a little brass-wheeled cart outside the Hartwell Palace forecourt for 19 years. My name is Tomas Ferreira. I know that forecourt the way a man knows the lines of his own hand. I know the heat that comes up off those stones in late summer until the air above them shivers. I know the tourists, the schoolchildren on their trips, the photographers who arrive at dawn for the light. And I know the guards, the tall, motionless men in the high black bearskins and the red wool tunics, the white gloves, the polished rifles, better than they will ever know me, because I have watched them stand through 19 summers while my chestnuts burned and my back ached and the world churned past their boots, and they did not move. That is the whole point of them. They do not move. So when I tell you that the guard moved before I did, you must understand what that means. I was closest. I want that on the record, because in the days that followed there were 100 people who swore they had been right there, who had seen it all, who had nearly done something themselves. They were not right there. I was right there. I had just handed a paper cone of warm chestnuts to a woman with a stroller, and I had my hand still out for her coins, and over her shoulder I watched the small gray shape at the railings go from a boy to a heap of cloth on the ground. For one heartbeat the crowd did the thing crowds do, which is nothing, a ripple of turned heads, a half step back instead of forward. Somebody said, "Oh," the way you say it when you drop something, not the way you say it when a person falls. The heat pressed down. A pigeon clattered up off the stones, and the boy lay there in the borrowed coat with his cheek against the cobbles, and his thin wrist was still threaded through the iron railing above him, so that even fallen he seemed to be holding on to the one solid thing he had found. I knew that wrist. I want to tell you that now before the rest because it matters. I had seen that boy for 3 days running. He came alone. He always came alone. He would stand at the railings in the worst of the afternoon heat. In that ridiculous coat he never took off even when the sweat shone on his forehead, and he would watch the guard on the near post with a kind of hunger that I mistook, the first day, for ordinary childish wonder. Lots of children stare at the guards like that, but this boy did not film them on a phone because he had no phone. He did not ask his mother to lift him up because there was no mother. He just stood, swaying very slightly, and watched, and once, only once, I saw him slip a crust of bread from his coat pocket and eat it in small, careful bites, turning away so no one would see, the way a proud man eats when he has only one thing and means to make it last. I should have done more on the first day. I have told myself that 1,000 times since. I gave him water once, and chestnuts twice, and both times he took them with a thank you so quiet and so formal it nearly broke me. And then he went straight back to the railings as though the food were a debt he had to repay by keeping watch. I did not call anyone. You do not call anyone. In 19 years on that pavement, I have learned that a lone, hungry child is the easiest thing in the world for a busy city to look straight through. But the guard had not looked through him. I understood that too, only afterward. Now the boy was down, and the heat was a living weight, and the crowd was doing its terrible nothing, and I dropped the chestnuts, the whole tray. I heard them scatter across the stones, and I did not care. I came around my cart, and I was already shouting, "He's down, the boy's down, somebody help me." And my voice cracked in the middle of it like a much younger man's, and I was running the 4 long steps to the railings on knees that have not run in a decade. And the guard came off his post. You have to understand that this does not happen. I had seen men spit at these guards. I had seen a drunk swing a bottle, seen tourists drape themselves over a sentry's shoulders for a photograph, seen a man in an expensive suit scream into a guardsman's face for 3 full minutes because the guard would not step aside for his car. They do not move. They have a relief who marches out to change them on a schedule fixed like the turning of the planets. Between those moments they are stone. There are rules older than any man now living about what may and may not draw a king's guard off his post, and a fainting child is not on the short, sacred list. He came off it anyway. He did not run, exactly. Even then, even in that, there was a held quality to him, a control, as though he had decided in some deep place that panic would not help the boy, and so he simply would not permit himself any. But he crossed that ground faster than I would have believed a man could move in that heavy uniform, the rifle already coming off his shoulder in one clean motion, and going down flat on the stones, not dropped, set down, with a care that struck me even in the chaos. And then he was on his knees beside the small gray heap, and his white gloves, those spotless ceremonial white gloves that are not supposed to touch anything in this world but his own rifle, were already moving to the boy's throat to find the pulse. "Get back," he said, not to me, to the crowd that had finally, now that someone else had gone first, begun to surge in close with their phones rising like a field of little glass eyes. "Give him air." "Back." It was the first time in 19 years I had heard one of them speak, and his voice was not what I expected. It was low and even and absolutely certain, the voice of a man who has knelt beside fallen people before and knows exactly what the next 60 seconds require. The crowd obeyed it the way the crowd had not obeyed my cracking shout. They fell back a pace. And the boy did not stir. The guard had 2 gloved fingers at the side of that thin throat, and his head was bent and very still, and I watched his face. I was that close. I was right over his shoulder by then. I watched his face while he counted, and I saw it change. I saw the exact instant the count gave him an answer he did not like. Something went hard and bright behind his eyes, and his free hand was already going up, and he turned his head a quarter turn toward the great arch of the gate where the sergeant of the watch would be, and he called out 4 words that I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. "Medic to the railings." He did not shout them the way I had shouted. He pitched them, that is the only word for it. He pitched his voice like a man throwing a rope to land exactly where he meant it to land, and they carried clean across the forecourt and through the arch and into the guardroom beyond, and I heard, somewhere in the shadow of that gate, a boot heel strike stone and a second voice answer, "Moving," and then the whole still machine of the palace woke up at once. I have never seen anything like it, and I had been standing outside that gate for 19 years thinking I had seen everything it could do. A second guardsman came out of the arch at a run, and he was not stopping at the boy. The first guard waved him past with 2 fingers, sending him on to clear a lane through the thickening crowd, and the man went and did it, herding tourists back with his arms wide and his voice flat and hard, opening a clear path from the railings to the gate. Behind him, a third figure came, this one not in the bearskin but in a plain dark uniform with a white satchel banging against his hip, and he was the medic, and he dropped to his knees on the boy's other side as though he and the guard had rehearsed this 1,000 times, which of course they never had, because this does not happen. "How long down?" the medic said. 40 seconds. I had eyes on him before he went. He'd been swaying a minute more. The guard said it fast and clean, no wasted breath. "Pulse is up and thready, skin's hot and dry, he's not sweating." The medic's hands were already opening the satchel. "Not sweating in this," he said, and looked up once at the white sky, and I understood from the grimness in it that not sweating in that heat was the bad answer, the dangerous answer, the body past the point where it can cool itself. "Heat," the medic said, "and he's running on empty. Look at him." He had the boy's wrist now, the one that wasn't still hooked through the railing, and he turned it gently so I could see what he saw, the thinness of it, the way the skin sat too close over the small bones. When did this one last eat a real meal, do you think? Nobody answered him, because nobody knew, except that I knew it had been crusts of bread for 3 days at least, and the words came out of me before I had decided to say them. He's been here 3 days. My voice still wasn't working right. Alone, every afternoon. There's no one with him. He had bread yesterday, just bread. The guard's head came up at that, and for the first time he looked at me directly, and I will tell you that it was like being looked at by a lighthouse. There was nothing soft in it and nothing unkind in it either, only a terrible attention. A man taking in everything I was and deciding in half a second exactly how much of it was useful. You know him, the guard said. It was not quite a question. I sell here, I've given him water. I felt absurd and useless saying it. I should have. You're giving him water now, the guard said. Cold, whatever you have. Not all at once. And he turned back to the boy, and I understood that I had just been folded into the machine too, that the stone man at the railings had taken the trembling old chestnut seller and made him a part of the rescue with one sentence, and that I had better not let him down. I went for the water. I had a cooler under the cart, ice barely holding in the heat, and I came back with 2 cold bottles and my hands were shaking so badly the caps would not turn. And the guard reached up without looking and took one from me and broke the seal one-handed against his own palm in a single practiced motion and handed it back. The boy stirred. It was small, a flutter behind the eyelids, a sound that wasn't quite a word. But after the long, terrible stillness, it went through all of us like current, and the medic said, "There he is, good lad, stay with me," in a voice gone suddenly gentle. And the guard did a thing I have turned over in my mind 100 times since. He took off his glove. One white glove, peeled off finger by finger and dropped on the cobbles beside the rifle, and he slid his bare hand under the boy's head where it lay against the hot stone, so that the boy's cheek was no longer on the burning cobbles but cradled in a man's palm. It was such a small thing. It broke a dozen rules. The gloves are not for taking off. The head of a man on duty does not bend. The KingsGuard does not touch and is not touched. And he did it without a flicker of hesitation, the way you would do it for your own son. And the boy turned his face very slightly into that bare hand the way an animal turns toward shade. And somewhere behind me, a woman in the crowd began, quietly, to cry. "There's a coat," I said stupidly. "He won't take the coat off, even in the heat. I've never seen him without it." "Leave the coat," the medic said, half to himself, easing the heavy gray fabric open at the throat without removing it. "He's holding onto something." And he glanced at the guard, and something passed between the 2 men, some understanding I only half caught, that a hungry child who will not surrender a coat 3 sizes too big in killing heat is a child who has learned that what he wears is all he owns, and that you do not strip a person of the last thing they are clutching, not even to help them, not unless you have to. So they did not take the coat, they cooled him around it. Cold water to the back of the neck, to the wrists, to the inside of the elbows where the blood runs close. The medic talking the whole time in that low, steady voice, the guard's bare hand never leaving the boy's head, and the second guardsman holding the lane open against a crowd that had gone from gawking to murmuring to something almost like prayer. Phones were still up. I won't pretend they weren't. But the laughter and the chatter had drained out of the forecourt, and what was left was the kind of silence 100 strangers make when they are all, at the same moment, hoping for the same small life. And then the boy opened his eyes and looked up into the face of the man holding his head and said the first thing I had ever heard him say above a whisper. "Am I in trouble?" The guard went very still, not the trained stillness of the post, a different stillness, the stillness of a grown man hit somewhere he did not expect to be hit, because the boy had not asked, "Am I all right?" He had not asked, "What happened?" or "Where is my mother?" or "Am I going to die?" He had come up out of the dark with a stranger's bare hand cradling his head and a ring of faces above him, and the very first thought in him, the reflex of him, was fear that he had done something wrong. I saw the guard's jaw tighten. I saw him take a breath, And when he answered the boy, his voice had changed again, all the command gone out of it, all the parade ground iron, and what was underneath was so quiet I had to lean in to hear it. "No, son, you're not in trouble. You're safe. You just got too hot, that's all, and you hadn't eaten enough, and your body laid you down so I could come and look after you." A pause. "Nobody's cross with you. You hear me? Not one soul here." The boy's eyes filled, not the loud crying of a child, but the slow welling of someone much older, someone who has learned that tears are a thing to be done quietly. And he nodded against the bare hand, and the guard nodded back, slow and grave, as though the two of them had settled something between them that the rest of us were only allowed to witness. "Good," the guard said. "Now you're going to drink a little water slow, and you're going to lie still while my friend here checks you over. And the worst thing that is going to happen to you today is that you're going to feel a bit foolish in front of all these people. That's the whole of it. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," the boy said. And the sir undid me. He could not have been more than 8 years old, lying in a coat made for a man, with chestnuts scattered around him that I had dropped, and he answered the guardsman the way a soldier answers. "Yes, sir," because somewhere in that small starved life he had learned that you say yes, sir, to a man in uniform, that uniforms are to be obeyed and trusted. And I thought, God help me, I thought, where did a hungry, motherless boy on a hot pavement learn that? And learn it so deep it came out of him before he was fully awake. The medic got water into him, a capful at a time, and color came back into the boy's lips by slow degrees. His pulse steadied. The dangerous heat began to break. And as he came back to himself, he began, in the way of a frightened child who finally feels safe enough to be frightened, to talk not all at once, not in order but in pieces, and we knelt there, and we let the pieces fall, and we did not push. His name was Pell, just Pell. If he had another name, he did not give it, and nobody made him. He had come to the Railings, he said, because his grandfather had told him to. I did not understand that at first, and neither, I think, did the guard. His grandfather had been sick a long time, Pell said, in a room above a shut-up shop on the far side of the river. And 3 days ago his grandfather had stopped waking up properly, and the lady from downstairs had come, and there had been people in a van, and somebody had said the word hospital, and somebody else had said the word arrangements, and Pell had been told to wait, and to be good, and not to be any trouble. And so he had done the thing his grandfather always told him to do when the world got too big. He had come to watch the guard. "He used to bring me," Pell said. His voice was thread-thin, but it did not waver now. He had decided, the way exhausted children do, that he was going to tell it all the way to the end. Every birthday. We'd take the bus and we'd come and stand right here and watch the changing, and Granddad would tell me, he'd say, the boy's face worked. He'd say a man can be still as a stone on the outside, and the whole time inside, he's standing guard over something. That's what they're doing. They look like they're not doing anything, but they're doing the most important thing there is. They're keeping watch so the rest of us can sleep. I heard the guard's breath go out of him. And when Granddad got too sick to come, Pell went on, he said I should still come. He said if I ever didn't know what to do, I should come and stand by the railings and watch them keep watch, and I'd remember how to be brave. So that's what I was doing. I was being brave. His chin came up half an inch, a tiny terrible flicker of the dignity I'd seen in him from the first day, the dignity of the boy who turned away to eat his crust. I wasn't being any trouble. You weren't any trouble, the guard said. You were the bravest thing in this whole square, and that's the truth, and I've stood in this square a long time. Is Granddad? Pell stopped, started again smaller. Nobody will tell me anything. And there it was, the real wound, under the heat and the hunger, the thing the boy had been carrying alone at the railings for 3 days while a great city walked past him. Not, am I going to be all right? He had never once been worried about himself. He was worried about the old man across the river, and he had been left to be brave by himself with no one to tell him, whether the man who taught him to be brave was alive or dead. The guard looked up, and his eyes found mine, and then went past me to the second guardsman holding the lane, and then to the medic, and I watched him make a decision. It was the same decision I realized later that he had made when he came off his post. The decision that a rule which fails the person in front of you is a rule you set down, carefully, the way he had set down his rifle, and pick up again afterward. He was a man who understood exactly what the rules were for. That was why he could put them down without breaking. "Pell," the guard said, "look at me. I am going to find out about your granddad." "Not somebody, me. You have my word, and a man in this coat does not give his word lightly, do you understand? I will find out, and I will make sure that whatever there is to know, somebody sits down with you and tells you properly, like a person, not a van pulling away. Nobody is going to leave you standing in a square wondering ever again. Is that a fair trade for you lying still and drinking your water?" Pell stared at him. I think he was trying to decide whether to believe it, and I think he had been disappointed enough times in 8 years that believing it cost him something. Then he put his free hand, the one that wasn't still loosely threaded through the railing, into the guard's bare hand, and shook it, once, very solemnly, the way his grandfather must have taught him a bargain is sealed. "Fair trade," he said. Behind me, the woman who had been crying made a small sound and pressed her hand to her mouth, and I realized the whole front of that crowd had gone quiet enough to hear all of it, every word, the boy and the soldier sealing their bargain on the hot stones, and that not a single one of those raised phones felt like an audience anymore. They felt like witnesses. There is a difference. An audience watches a thing happen to other people. A witness takes it on, carries it out of the square, is changed. But the guard was not finished, and what he did next was the thing that turned a kind act into something I have never been able to forget, because as gently as he had handled all the rest of it, there was one more thing he had noticed, the way he had noticed the swaying before the boy fell, the way these still men notice everything from inside their stillness. He had noticed the coat, and he had begun, very carefully, to ask Pell about the coat. "That's a fine coat," the guard said. He said it the way you compliment a frightened animal, easy and unhurried. "Bit big for you yet. You'll grow into it." "Whose was it before yours?" "Granddad's," Pell said at once, and his hand tightened on the heavy gray fabric, and now I understood why he would not take it off, not in the heat, not for the medic, not for anyone. It was not all he owned. It was all he had left of the man who taught him to be brave, and he had been wearing it around the city like armor for 3 days, breathing the smell of it, because while he had the coat he was not entirely alone. "He wore it to come and watch with you," the guard said. "Every birthday." Pell's fingers moved over a spot on the breast of the coat, and I saw then what he was touching, a place where the wool was a slightly different shade, a small rectangle, as though something had been pinned or sewn there once and removed. "There used to be a thing here. Granddad had pins. He kept them in a tin. He said he earned them a long time ago and they had to be looked after." The boy's brow creased. "He gave the coat to me, but he kept the tin. He said the coat was for keeping warm, but the tin was for keeping faith, and that was a different kind of looking after, and I was too little yet." The guard had gone very still again, and this time I knew the stillness for what it was. He had reached out with one finger and touched the faded rectangle on the breast of the coat, the ghost shape where a row of metal ribbons had once been stitched and then carefully unpicked, and I watched a man who stood guard over a palace recognize, in a starving boy's hand-me-down, the coat of another man who had once stood guard over something himself. "Pell," the guard said, and his voice had a new weight in it. "Your granddad, was he ever a soldier?" "He was a guard," Pell said simply, as if it were obvious, as if everyone knew. "Like you, a long time ago, before I was born. He didn't have the tall hat anymore, but he had the coat and he had his pins and he had," the boy faltered, hunting for the word an old man had used, "he had his post. He said even when you leave you never really leave. He said you just get given a smaller post. He said I was his post now." I will not pretend to you that I understood in that moment everything that passed across the guard's face, but I understood enough. I understood that the man kneeling on the cobblestones with his glove off and his rifle laid aside had just learned that the small, starved boy he'd broken every rule to save was the grandson of one of his own, a guardsman of an earlier watch, an old soldier who had taught his only grandchild that to stand still and keep faith was the highest thing a man could do, and who had then, dying across the river, sent the boy to the Railings to be brave in the company of strangers in red, because he had no one else to send him to. The guard rose to one knee. He did not let go of the boy's head. He simply lifted it higher with great care, so that Pell was half sitting now, propped against the guard's forearm in the shade the man's own body threw across the stones. And he raised his eyes to the arch of the gate, where I now saw a fourth figure had come out and was standing watching it all, an older man, broad through the shoulders, with a sergeant's bearing and 3 more guardsmen forming up behind him in the cool dark of the gateway. "Sergeant," the guard called, and again it was that thrown rope of a voice, pitched to carry and no louder than it had to be. "This boy is the grandson of a guardsman, former service. I'd take it as a personal kindness if the watch could find out which house he served, and find it out fast, and I want welfare and a doctor here for the boy, proper care, not a number on a list. And someone needs to go across the river tonight and stand by that old man, because there's a child here who's been carrying the not knowing alone for 3 days, and that ends today." There was a silence in the gateway. I held my breath. Because I did not know, you understand, none of us watching knew, whether the great still machine of the palace would close its iron face again now that the immediate danger was past, whether a sergeant would come and clap the young guardsman on the shoulder and say, "Well done, and now back to your post, son. The rules are the rules, and the boy will be handed off to the proper office and the proper form. That is how it usually goes. That is how the world usually walks past a hungry child." I had watched it happen for 19 years. The sergeant came forward. He crossed the forecourt without hurry, a big weathered man whose own white gloves and brass and bearskin made him a twin to the guard, and the crowd parted for him the way water parts for the bow of a ship. And he came, and he looked down at the boy in the borrowed coat, and at the faded rectangle on the breast of it, and at the young guardsman kneeling in the dirt with his glove off and his rifle laid by. And for a long moment the sergeant said nothing at all. Then he did something I had never seen and never expected to see. He bent, slowly, stiffly, a big older man getting down onto one knee on the hot stones in front of a crowd and 100 cameras, and he put 2 fingers to the brim of his own bearskin, and he held them there, and he looked the boy in the eye. "Young man," the sergeant said, "on behalf of the watch, I'm sorry we didn't see you sooner. You've been standing your grandfather's post these 3 days and we walked past it. That won't happen again." He lowered his hand. "Your grandfather served the king's house, and that makes you family, and this house does not leave its family standing alone in a square. Do you understand me?" Pell, I think, did not fully understand. He was 8 and exhausted and had just come up out of the dark, but he understood the salute. He understood the kneeling. He understood that a great old man in the same coat as his grandfather had just gotten down on the ground to look him in the eye and call him family, and his face came apart at last, the brave, careful dignity dissolving all at once into the simple grief of a child who has been holding too much for too long, and he turned his face into the young guard's shoulder and wept, and the guard held him, glove off, rifle down, every rule on the ground around them like the scattered chestnuts, and did not let go. And the sergeant rose and turned to his men in the gateway, and began, quietly, without spectacle, the way these things are done when they are done right, to set the whole machine of the palace in motion on behalf of one small boy. What happened after that happened fast, and most of it I learned in pieces over the days and weeks that followed, because once the boy was safe my part in it shrank back down to its proper size, an old chestnut seller who happened to be standing in the right place. But I stayed. I gathered up my scattered chestnuts much later, when it was over. I was not going anywhere until I knew. A proper ambulance came, not a number on a list, and it came for Pell, who did not want to go without the guard. And so the guard rode with him as far as the gate, his hand still under the boy's head, talking low the whole way about nothing in particular, about chestnuts and bearskins and the bus they would take together one day. At the ambulance the boy clutched at the man's sleeve, and I heard the guard say, very steadily, "I gave you my word. A man in this coat does not give his word lightly. I will know where you are by tonight, and you will know where I am, and that is a promise. Now go and let the doctors fuss over you, and eat everything they put in front of you, because the next time I see you I expect you to fill out that coat a little better." And Pell, against everything, laughed, a small cracked laugh, but a real one, and let go of the sleeve. The old man across the river was alive. I want you to have that the way I had it late that first night, when one of the guardsmen came out to my cart with 2 coffees and told me, because by then they knew I had been the one who shouted, the one who fetched the water, the one who had watched the boy 3 days and done too little and could not stop thinking about it. He was alive. Very ill, very old, near the end of a long road, but alive, and lucid in his hours. And when the watch sent a man across the river that very evening, an old guardsman himself, retired, the sergeant had hunted him down within the hour, because that is what the sergeant had meant by family. When that old retired guardsman walked into the room above the shut-up shop and stood at the foot of the bed and named the house and the year of his service, Pell's grandfather had wept and tried to sit up and could not, and the 2 old soldiers had held each other's hands and not needed to say very much at all. And they told the old man his grandson was safe. That was the first thing they told him, before anything else, because they understood what an old guardsman would need to hear first. The boy is safe. The boy is fed and looked after and not alone. You can stand down now. We have the watch. He lived 11 more days. I am told he spent them quietly, and that Pell was brought to see him properly, with a kind woman from the welfare office who did not rush them and did not stand over them, and that the boy sat by the bed in the too big coat and told his grandfather everything. The heat, the railings, the falling, the bare hand under his head, the sergeant who knelt. And I am told the old man listened to all of it, and at the end of it he said only, "I knew where to send you," and closed his eyes and was content. The young guard kept his word. Of course he did. He went across the river on his own time, twice, in plain clothes that looked strange on him, and he sat with the old man and they talked the shorthand that men of the same trade talk across the years. And when it was over, when the old guardsman finally stood down for good, it was the watch that saw him off, quietly, with no cameras and no fuss, 4 men in red who had never met him standing a vigil for one of their own, because once you are of that company you are never truly out of it. His pins, the ones from the tin, the ones he had told Pell were for keeping faith, they were pinned back onto the breast of the gray coat, into that faded rectangle that had waited for them, and Pell wears them now. He is too little yet, as his grandfather said. He will grow into the coat. He will grow into the pins. He is being looked after, really looked after, by people the house found and vouched for, not a number on a list, and the young guard is a fixed point in his life now, the way a post is a fixed point, and on the boy's birthday they take the bus and they come and they stand at the railings and watch the changing of the guard, and I sell them chestnuts and will not take their money, and we none of us say very much, because some things do not need much saying. People ask me when they hear I was there whether it was a miracle. It was not a miracle. A miracle is a thing that comes from outside and saves you when nothing in the world could. This was the opposite of that. This was a thing that came from inside a man trained for years to stand still and feel nothing show on his face, a man whose entire purpose is restraint, and the marvel of it was never that he broke. The marvel was that all that iron discipline, all those years of standing like stone while the world spat and shoved and screamed and walked on past, had not hollowed the man out. It had filled him up. It had made a vessel of him. He had spent his whole life learning to hold, and so when the moment came that something was worth holding, He had hands strong enough and steady enough and gentle enough to hold it without crushing it. I think about that often now at the railings, watching them. The tourists see men who do not move and think the not moving is the whole of it. They are wrong, and the boy's grandfather was right, and the boy knows it better than any of us because he learned it the hard way, on the hot stones, on the worst day of his small life. A man can be still as stone on the outside, and the whole time inside he is standing guard over something. They look like they are doing nothing. They are doing the most important thing there is. They are keeping the watch so the rest of us can sleep. And when one of us falls in front of them, when one small frightened person folds down onto the cobbles with nobody left in the world to catch him, the stillness is not a wall. It is a coiled spring. It is a thing held back precisely so that it can be spent, all at once in the right direction, on the day it matters. I dropped a whole tray of chestnuts that day and never picked most of them up. The pigeons had them. I have never minded a thing less in my life. The young guard is back at his post most days. If you went tomorrow, you would walk past him and see exactly what the tourists see: a tall, still figure in red and black, white-gloved, eyes forward, a statue at the gate, a man apparently doing nothing at all. You would have no way of knowing what I know. You would not see the bare hand under a falling boy's head. You would not hear the 4 words thrown clean across a forecourt. You would not know that the stillest man you ever walked past was the fastest to move when a small life needed moving for. But I know I was right there. And every afternoon, when the light goes long and golden across the forecourt and the day's last crowd thins away, I look over at him standing there keeping his patient watch, and I lift my hand, just a little, the way you do to an old friend across a busy street. And once, only once, so quick I might have dreamed it, I am almost certain that he lifted 2 white fingers off the stock of his rifle and lowered them again and went back to standing guard over all of us. The way the good ones always have.